Stephen said, Burke brings up the idea of psychoanalysis as an analogy to rhetoric and what it does for the audience. Castelli says that rhetoric is a form of interpretation, and he goes into farther about how the analysis of psychoanalysis leads us to this. Jonathan Lear says the interpretation of emotion is the completion of its effort at expressing an idea. So through the interpretation of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, you can fully express that emotion, you can fully express that idea. Jonathan Lear also says that the central purpose of psychoanalysis is to guide the analysand, the person being analyzed, to a healthier understanding of their own drives. And through this, the interpretation, because they can fully understand their own drives, the interpretation becomes something that the analysand can hold on to, that the interpretation is filled with life and meaning for that person. So the interpretation then becomes the expression of the idea and drives through this process. How it relates to rhetoric is a little different. Just like rhetoric, when you're talking to someone through persuasion, you can't simply be right. You can't just use reason, because not everyone just responds to reason. As a scientist, you could spew out as many facts as you can, but not everyone will understand. What you need to do is you need to relate to your audience, or relate to the analysand, in order to spark their interest and in order to allow the audience to create their own interpretation through what you're saying. And also, another way that psychoanalysis and rhetoric acts as the same is that the analysand and the audience both become judges for their own interpretation. The audience acts more of a judge for what the rhetor is saying. The analysand is acting more of a judge towards what the psychoanalysis is saying, guiding him towards. So eventually the goal of persuasion is to allow the audience to see the world differently, and it's the same way through psychoanalysis. The goal of psychoanalysis is to allow the analysand to see their own world differently and to understand their own drives and emotions. Some examples of these are from the TV show House and the movie V for Vendetta. In the TV show House, what happens is someone gets sick, they go to House and the doctors in order to feel better. They end up getting sicker and sicker until finally only one specific treatment can fix them. Sometimes the patient agrees to the treatment, sometimes they don't. And House and his team then have to try and understand why this patient won't accept the treatment. So some of the characters on the show go in and say that you have leukemia, you need a bone marrow transplant. This is what needs to be done. This is what's reasonable, this is what is right. But the patient doesn't always acknowledge that, and so what House or another character will do is they'll sit there and they'll talk and they'll ask questions to the patient, like, why do you feel this way? Why won't you accept this treatment? What happens? And therefore, by the end of the show, the patient will learn to see the world differently and will understand why they're not accepting the treatment, or why they will accept the treatment, or how they're going to live their life in the future. In V for Vendetta, there are a couple examples of this, but one in particular is when V, the main character, takes Evie, another character, and sort of puts her through this torture simulation. She doesn't know it's a simulation, but he's actually the one putting her through what he went through. And at the end, she comes out looking at the world through a different perspective. She has no more fear anymore. She understands how she feels about what happened to her parents and about what happened in her past. And V doesn't necessarily tell her, like, this is what you are going through, this is what is happening to you, this is what you are feeling. Instead, she's the one who talks to him and says, I feel this way, this is what is happening to me. And V is able to see that transition in her, but doesn't necessarily tell her to go through that transition. And the next speaker will talk about why the rhetor and the psychoanalysis is important.